Hello there.
And we are back with more DC Comics, the New 52. We got two more comics up for review in this video. You're gonna say something?
Yeah, we seem to have Frankenstein, Agent of S.H.A.D.E, and Mr. Terrific. I have no idea why.
Well,
Especially the Frankenstein Agent of S.H.A.D.E. Apparently I thought that would be a good idea. Please tell me what I was thinking, though.
So we'll start with Frankenstein then.
Of course.
Well, I just want to take a special mention of the cover. Pose like a team, because shit just got real.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, from the cover, it looks like you might have something going on there. I see Frankenstein holding a minigun, someone who I assume, I'm not sure entirely who that is just from looking at the cover, but I see someone with 4 arms and 4 guns. That's great. Japanese schoolgirl with a domino mask and another gun. Why not? I mean, I see potential in it. Do you see potential in it, Noah?
A little bit.
Then why don't I see potential in the book itself? Why don't I see any actual anything?
Are you just going to be asking rhetorical questions for the whole of this review?
Why would I be asking rhetorical questions?
Because you know the answer, because you read the book, and you know how you feel about it.
Anyway, moving on. The story of Frankenstein, Agent of S.H.A.D.E. Should you talk about that, or should I?
I'll do it.
Alright.
Okay, so, Frankenstein, the Frankenstein's monster, same one from Mary Shelley's, presumably, or maybe the movie. He works for this super secret government-y-ish agency called S.H.A.D.E, which is kind of like the Ghostbusters. They deal with the supernatural events that happened in the DC universe, and they... Actually, a more accurate description might be like a supernatural version of Torchwood from Doctor Who.
I have no idea what he's talking about.
So, yeah. They deal with the supernatural stuff that, the other guys can't deal with. And in this comic, Frankenstein, I guess he's been away from S.H.A.D.E for a little bit because he's being introduced to a new top-secret base they have.
Because he was on Mars!
Yeah. And he returns just in time for him to be assigned to a new mission where he has to fight a bunch of monsters that came from nowhere.
Yeah.
And are attacking a town in the middle of nowhere.
He doesn't come back just in time. They actually call him while he's on vacation.
On Mars.
Yeah, on Mars. Because
his wife went missing.
Yeah, his expertise is necessary for this situation.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyway, in terms of my view on the story, my problem is that it doesn't seem like there's very much story there. I mean, it's got a pretty simple premise. It's got something that could be really easily built off of. I think there are a lot of team action movie type things. I would say Reconnaissance, but that's not really what this is. I would say Die Hard on a X. It's kind of got that style of action movie where you have... It really... Okay, to be honest, it feels most like an older Arnold Schwarzenegger movie.
Yeah, like Predator or something.
Not Predator. Something more like... What's the one where he lied to the guy who he said he was going to kill last?
I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's a line in a movie, and...
Are you sure that isn't the Simpsons thing with the...
That's a parody of that movie.
Ah, okay.
So, that is what I'm reminded of the most, just sort of that style thing, where there's some sort of enemy that you need, the big guy with the big guns, who's like kind of the loner, but he's the best at what he does, so he has to get in there and do stuff, and he has like a team who he needs to learn to work with, and they're also really skilled. This one has a mummy medic. And
who came from nowhere.
Yeah, he came from nowhere. It's odd, they don't know the location of the origin of the mummy. He's a mummy. Take a guess. So that's the kind of thing that it is. And his wife, who I assume is the bride of Frankenstein, was involved early on with fighting the monsters, but she's, I think, gone missing.
She disappeared mysteriously.
She's disappeared, but they were having marital troubles to begin with, so now the wife is in danger. It's kind of got a Die Hard thing to it.
Yeah.
Just this entire genre of action movie, it relates to. But the problem is that it doesn't develop it any more than just kind of presenting us with a chain of very loosely written cliches.
But they're monsters.
Yeah, it seems almost like what they're going for is that it's that kind of a thing, but they're monsters.
But they didn't go through with it.
Yeah, it's not funny. They don't really use the premise for a lot of humor. There's like a few little jokes in there, like she left you 80 years ago. But it doesn't really. It's not something that's consistent, and it's not something that I think really delivers in terms of humor.
And none of the characters are really interesting in their own right. They're those kind of generic action guys.
I'd say the most interesting character in it is Ray Palmer, but that's because he's
the Atom.
That's because he's the Atom. Yeah. So that is one. I mean, probably the best part of it is the fact that Ray Palmer's in it. Not that he really does anything that interesting.
Oh, well, while we're on it,
actually, could I just say?
The girl on the cover. That's not really a spoiler.
It's Father Time!
Yeah, because Father Time takes a new body every something millennia, and this time he's chosen to become Go-Go from Kill Bill.
Yeah, and I mean, but to be honest, the cover makes him. The cover's actually very misleading because
you think it's going to be cool.
Because you think it's going to be cool. No, but first off, I mean, it's like okay, Frankenstein that kind of works, but Father Time doesn't actually do anything in terms of action.
Frankenstein doesn't have a minigun.
Frankenstein doesn't have a minigun, and
Bride of Frankenstein goes missing before the comic happens.
She appears for one panel in a flashback. So yeah, misleading, probably the most misleading cover
and
so
no one
far.
Poses like a team when shit gets real.
Yeah, I would say that shit doesn't even get real.
No.
And in addition to all of that, we have kind of a 4 or 5 page info dump about how the headquarters works, which I didn't need to know.
No.
And it's not just that I didn't need to know it, but I feel that now that I know it, I actually care less. It's like they forgot to really make a story beyond the premise.
Yeah.
And do we want to talk about the visual style?
It's messy, sloppy.
I wouldn't. Could I actually?
I mean, it is stylized.
There's one page that I think demonstrates that really well. I mean, it's very sketchy. It's very liney. You don't have a lot of dimension. You don't have a lot of detail necessarily on expression and stuff, which I think it can work. I think it could create an atmosphere. It's a style. I don't think it works for this because what they show generally is giant fight scenes and
they
lots
just
of
look sloppy and messy.
Giant fight scenes and lots of complex architecture, which I don't think is really what you should be showing with this kind of style. I mean, for a really good example of that, here's probably the big splash page from. This isn't a fight scene. This is the flashback of monsters. Oh, and they have to fight a bunch of monsters, but they're monsters. But the monsters they're bad monsters or something. It's not really explained more than that, other than like they're bad monsters and they're good monsters and something. I mean, It's busy. I'm not going to say it's loud, but it's cluttered. But you really can't follow what's going on. And when you get to the big group fight scene, it's the worst. I mean, I'm not going to say it's the worst big group fight scene, but it's probably the worst thing that you could use this style of art to show.
And there's one thing I think it does well, but it's the only one thing, and because it does it well, it kind of just shows that it can't do anything else well, and that it does make the monsters look more grotesque and monstery. But that's about it. Like that's all it complements, and it just makes normal people like Ray Palmer look, sketchy or like they smoke too much or something, and it makes the action jagged.
Yeah, I mean, if you're drawing monsters and if you were to do like a horror comic or something, I could see this working. But for essentially team action book like this, I don't see it working at all. So, where would you put Frankenstein, Agent of S.H.A.D.E on a letter scale?
I'd give it a D-.
I'd give it an F. And my F comes from the fact that, well, I wouldn't say there's anything in here that is particularly or egregiously offensive or anything. There's nothing in here that makes me necessarily angry. There is also absolutely nothing to indicate why I am reading it. I'm not sure why I'm reading it at all.
We just kind of picked it up because it sounded funny.
Actually, I think the reason that we picked it up is because a certain other person insisted that we do so. Now, how to get him to buy this off of me? He'll be disappointed when he finds out that there's no James Bond-style opening sequence.
No.
That actually that would have worked.
Yeah, if it was Frankenstein, Agent of MI6.
And Father Time is...
Q.
Q.
Yeah. We just came up with a better premise for the comic.
I'm not going to say a better premise, but it's a better execution of essentially the premise that they already have.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on to Mr. Terrific. The world's third smartest man.
And no, we don't find out who 1 and 2 are.
Someone actually asks, and he
In the
seems to
comic.
get kind of vaguely annoyed.
Yeah.
We've been asking that for a while, but
Should we go to the panel where they asked?
nah, I think the fact that we know that they ask is
Okay.
enough.
So we talked about it, and we actually kind of have differing opinions on this.
Mm-hmm. This is...
But first, we should give a summary or something.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is... Do we want to talk about who Mr. Terrific is? Well, that's really part of the... That's most of the plot of this, so do
Yeah.
you want to just give a summary of the
Well,
plot of the book?
okay, so the plot, it's kind of part flashback, part happens in the now, and that's exactly how they captioned it,
Yeah.
now and then. So it starts off with a chase, like a lot of these other comics. Mr. Terrific's chasing this guy in London, and then he catches him, and then we're kind of go to a flashback of how Mr. Terrific became Mr. Terrific, or why, kind of. Then we get introduced to the villain, I guess.
I don't think that it's really clear who the villain is at all.
Yeah,
It actually
it's
says,
a mystery.
Yeah, it says at the end, it does say at the end, I don't think this is a spoiler, that the villain is going to be introduced in the next book. So right now we're just getting kind of hints at what this villain might be or what he might be doing.
And what he's capable of.
Yeah, but there is sort of a mystery that emerges, which I suppose is a result of this villain. And then Mr. Terrific is called in by the LAPD to try to solve the problem. And we also get looks at his personal life and his relationships with people, mostly women. And I think that pretty much covers...
Without, like, getting into the backstory, because the comic does cover most of his backstory and past.
Yeah. So, your impressions. I'll let you talk first.
I did like it. I liked his... I mean, I don't want to say that he didn't get really characterized, but I liked the, I guess, implied characterization. We get a lot of inner monologue from Mr. Terrific, so we get an insight onto how he thinks about things. And I guess this is kind of lazy, but we are told about like his political views. So they give us like kind of snippets about who Mr. Terrific is. And I kind of like his character, just personally. He watches Doctor Who, so I like that. And he seems like a nice person, I guess. I thought it was kind of like, Static Shock, which I didn't like. And that they're both these smart superheroes who do rely on this, more science-y than Batman does, like detective, or Green Arrow just does gadgetry, but they rely more on actual like physics and sciencey stuff. But while Static goes into all the technobabble stuff of it and just kind of loses people, and while he's arrogant, Mr. Terrific is he just kind of, I don't know, he's like he gets annoyed by people when he introduces himself as the third smartest man, and people are like, well, who's number 1 and 2? And he's like, well, how about just a thanks for saving your life? So he does, kind of get annoyed by the pressure of, I guess, superherodom, but he does take it in stride because he does kind of seem to have a higher calling.
See, I can see now why people think you hate Static.
Because I think he's incredibly obnoxious.
I mean the character, not the book.
Oh, because
that's what people are saying in the comments. They're saying you hate Static.
No, I like the idea. I like electric powers, and maybe it's just nostalgia, but I did like the cartoon.
Yeah, well, I would take that up with them. I actually think that the problem with this book, as far as what I'm getting out of it, is that there's a lot of information, there's a lot of exposition, there's a lot of backstory, but I don't really think that it's moving the plot forward. I mean, and I also don't really think that it's doing much to characterize, or I'm not going to say characterize, I don't think it does much to show the personality of the person who we're following. I mean, there are a lot of ideas that are introduced that I think can work very well. I think there's this idea of he's a character who has some great grief in his past, like a lot of other characters, but also that what he does as a superhero, I don't think this is really spoiling or anything, especially since it's backstory, what he does as a superhero isn't motivated by, let's say, a lust for justice, as a lot of other characters have, but more, it's essentially preordained, it's predestined.
Yeah, he does have something happens, someone tells them, you gotta be a superhero, and he says, okay.
It's an obligation that he has to the world. So, I mean,
Yeah.
how he feels about that raises some good questions. And also that he can't get too close to women, even though women are interested in him. I think these are all really interesting ideas, but all of them are just told to us, and I don't think any of that is ever reflected in the things that he says and does when he's around people. So I think that we've got information about what his personality is, but I don't think we ever really see it. And that, I think, is pretty kind of disappointing. It makes the rest of it feel kind of dry, even when for other books it might not be. Also, I think that, well...
You are right, not much does really happen.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't think that having that much exposition is necessarily bad, but I think in some points it goes a little bit overboard. Like there are essentially 3.5 pages where we have an internal monologue of Mr. Terrific trying to figure out what caused a certain
thing to happen.
I'm going to say thing because this is getting toward the end. It's really more of a plot point. But and that would be good, but it's not as though it's something that's so complex or something that's presented in such a mysterious way that the audience hasn't already figured it out at that point. I think it's an idea that's introduced very well, it's introduced very effectively, but then, as we're seeing inside his mind, I don't think it's showing anything terribly impressive about him, and I think it's also making things terribly redundant. And so, yeah, overall, my objections would be the lack of a real defined personality that's expressed very much, and also that I don't know, it's hard to tell where this story is going or if I really want to follow the story, because it could end up becoming an interesting story, but right now it's just kind of... There's no particular element of it that's engaging enough. Even the mystery of what's going to happen next, I don't think is really engaging enough that I could see myself committing to reading the series, or even another issue.
I do want to read them. I'd start picking this up.
So, on a letter scale...
Oh, wait, we forgot to talk about the
art.
Oh,
the art, of course.
Yeah. Well, the art, it is kind of two-sided like Green Lantern was, in that during the, action scenes where Mr. Terrific is in costume, there's a lot of, like, I guess, science-y effects. There's a lot of light and lasers and movement. Like you just see from the first page here. You just definitely a lot of stuff going on. But it isn't over, there's not too much going on where it's crowded. You can clearly see everything, and there's a lot of glowy, sciencey stuff.
Yeah, it has a really high-tech, sort of futuristic look to it. And also not just futuristic, but at some points also kind of otherworldly or supernatural.
Yeah,
because it does, I think it blurs the line.
Like during this.
I think it blurs the line a lot between sort of physics and metaphysics. That's also another thing that, it's an interesting point that Mr. Terrific is an atheist, which I think just the concept of being an atheist in a universe where gods walk among men is an interesting idea. But beyond that, despite that, we have kind of a very almost... I think the science does get at points almost to a supernatural, metaphysical, or spiritual level. So we have a lot of things that one may consider to be spiritual going on, even though it's someone who's grounded very much in logic and reality. That's something I like. And I think that visually it's depicted really well. You have a lot of... Could we go back to that one page?
Okay.
I think you have a lot of the blues and the purples and... Not just color, but the way
it looks very sci-fi.
Or this page. Very sci-fi, but also very... It's not mechanical.
No.
I mean, it's not like cold and... It's not this sort of pristine lab atmosphere. It's not this cold mechanical atmosphere. It's really sort of this otherworldly, futuristic... Not necessarily... Well, neonish, and just sort of, supernatural sense. It reminds me a little bit, not entirely, but it reminds me a little bit of Green Lantern with the outer space shots. It's the same effect. So I think the art definitely works very well.
But I don't... To that same thing, I kind of don't like the cover, because it is just gray and black, really.
Yeah, I mean, if anything... Kind of I think this is supposed to be like a computer chip or something.
Yeah.
But if anything, the cover is misleading. It makes it look worse than it actually is, just visually. And another thing I will say, if we're considering how much backstory there is in this, I'm not sure it necessarily does a great job of explaining what Mr. Terrific can do.
No. I mean, we're given like in the first chase scene, he seems to be using the balls to, well, let me get to the other page. He seems to be using the balls to kind of, as stepping stones to fly. Well, not fly, but use them as a type of non-ground-based movement.
He can magnetize things, and I know.
Yeah.
But I don't think that there's any moment where explicitly like, all right, so this is what Mr. Terrific's powers are, or not even necessarily powers. This is what Mr. Terrific can do in combat, and I think that if we're having this opening chase sequence, I think that would be the perfect time to kind of make that very clear, because otherwise, it doesn't hurt the story, but it does leave you wondering a little bit.
Yeah.
So now, where on a letter scale would you put this book?
I'd put it as a C.
C.
A C. Because I did like it, but you are right. A lot of stuff is vague or only implied. But I think it does have potential, I think. I think the character has potential. I think the story has potential.
Yeah.
And I did like it overall, but you are right. It is just kind of shallow.
On the one hand, I think it's well drawn, and I think that there are elements of it that work. I don't think it's bad writing. I just don't think that... I think it's just lacking, very heavily lacking in certain elements that I find very important, and that really are the things that engage me and make me want to read these sorts of books. So I'm going to go a little bit lower than you. I'm going to put it at maybe a D+.
Okay.
And I think in our next review, we are going to be coming back with what other two fantastic books from this
let's see.
week 2 of the relaunch?
We could do, how about Demon Knights?
Demon Knights and Batwoman.
Okay. See you there.